The Whispers of the Rockies. In the stark, echoing silence of the Colorado Rockies, where jagged peaks claw at an indifferent sky and ancient pines cast long, skeletal shadows, an unsettling chill endures. It clings to the wind that whispers through abandoned ski jumps and drapes like a ghostly shroud over the enduring mystery of Morgan Salazar and his young wife, Frances. Morgan was no ordinary man. His name, a dark stain in the annals of Denver's elite, was synonymous with property deals, but also with whispered ties to cartels, with blood, and with scandal. Frances, a woman drawn to his dangerous orbit by a love as fierce as it was perhaps misguided, vanished by his side. Years later, their abandoned luggage surfaced, bearing two words scrolled in an ominous hand: "Revenge taken." Was it murder, betrayal, or a meticulously planned escape into the mountain's embrace? The peaks, those silent, stony witnesses, remember what men often strive to forget. Morgan Salazar, the untouchable shadow. Morgan Salazar, at 45, moved through the world with an undeniable aura of wealth and influence. Yet, beneath the polished facade, a darker legend festered. Born from humble roots in Lima, Peru, he quickly learned that power, not honesty, was the true currency of the world. The 1990s saw him plunge into the roaring property market, first flipping houses, then entire city blocks. By the early 2000s, his name glittered on multi-million-dollar developments from the sun-drenched shores of Miami to the high altitudes of Denver. But his empire was built on shifting sand, on foundations stained with accusations. Prosecutors painted a stark picture: money laundering, intricate cartel connections, and illegal trafficking. Whispers grew louder, claiming Morgan's sprawling construction sites were not merely buildings but clandestine drop points for narcotics and illicit cash, cunningly bricked into the very walls of his growing empire. The law, a lumbering beast, finally cornered him in 2005. A 10-year sentence for money laundering and facilitating cartel operations should have been his undoing. Instead, it became a mere blip, a footnote in his unfolding saga. With almost supernatural speed, appeals materialized, judges inexplicably shifted, and key witnesses dissolved into thin air. After a mere 18 months, Morgan Salazar walked free. He emerged from the courthouse, a chilling smile playing on his lips, vowing to rebuild his shattered empire. The message was unmistakable. Morgan was not just another criminal. He was untouchable. His enemies, a chorus of thwarted prosecutors and vengeful rivals, fumed in impotent rage. But beneath their anger lay a profound fear. Those who dared to speak against him rarely prospered. Some saw their businesses crumble, others their reputations shredded, and a chilling few simply vanished, their lives extinguished like candles in the wind.
2 years later, in 2007, his own hubris almost became his downfall once more. Accusations flared that he had orchestrated a murder for hire targeting a rival developer. The city reeled. His face, a mask of calm defiance, was plastered across headlines, branding him a kingpin cloaked in designer suits. A judge, undeterred, handed down a 30-year sentence. Yet the iron bars of justice once again failed to hold him. Within 2 months, witnesses recanted their testimonies. Crucial evidence mysteriously evaporated, and Morgan Salazar strode out a free man. Some murmured of colossal bribes. Others whispered of silent threats, of opposition forced into submission. To those watching, the intricate truth mattered less than the terrifying outcome. Morgan Salazar was a man who could bend the very fabric of law to his indomitable will. By 2008, he was not just back in business. He was a titan unleashed. His property dealings grew bolder, more aggressive, and infinitely more perilous. Beneath the gleaming glass towers and luxurious mountain retreats he peddled to the ultra-wealthy, investigators claimed he was laundering millions for cartels stretching from the ancient heart of Peru to the sun-scorched plains of Mexico. Morgan had become a chilling hybrid, both shrewd businessman and a shadowy broker of profound criminality.
The believer in second chances. Yet his personal life, a stark contrast to his public notoriety, remained eerily barren. Divorced, with 2 children he rarely saw, a parade of women drifted in and out of his opulent life, none lingering. Then, in 2007, he met Frances Hale. Frances was 33, a social worker from a quiet Midwestern town. Intelligent, driven, and possessing a serene grace, she was described by friends as an unwavering believer in second chances. This profound belief, however, would prove dangerously potent when she encountered Morgan at a glittering charity gala in Denver. She had read the headlines, of course. Everyone had. But in person, Morgan was a force of nature. His charm was a seductive balm, disarming her every reservation. His tales of clawing his way from obscurity captivated her. Despite his venomous reputation, Frances saw something deeper, a wounded soul she believed she could somehow save. To her friends, Morgan was a looming storm to be meticulously avoided. But to Frances, he was a man deserving of understanding, a redemption story waiting to be written. Their courtship began cautiously in 2007. Morgan, however, pursued her with a relentless, almost predatory energy. Torrents of flowers, exquisite dinners, hushed promises of a future cleansed of his past. Frances wrestled with the dissonance between the man she knew and the villain so vividly painted by the press. "They don't know him like I do," she would often confide in her sister, clinging to the fragile hope that love could rewrite history. By December 2009, she married him, convinced of her power to transform him. To outsiders, it was a shocking union. To Morgan, it was perfection. Frances, by his side, softened his hard edges, lending him an air of respectability he could never conjure alone. Yet Frances was not as naive as she appeared. Her love for him was genuine, but it did not blind her to the abyss of his secrets. She observed the late-night phone calls spoken in hushed Spanish, the abrupt unannounced trips to Miami and Mexico, the way conversations would abruptly cease and shift whenever she entered a room. Slowly, meticulously, she began to keep notes. Dates, places, names overheard. Some speculate it was born of fear, a clandestine safety net against the inevitable collapse of his empire. Others insist she had already begun a quiet cooperation with federal agents, weaving a case against her husband from the very heart of his world. Whether she was an innocent ensnared or a silent informant remains an unanswered question. But by the time they planned their fateful hiking trip in 2010, Frances Hale harbored secrets of her own.
The gathering storm. As the decade drew to a close, Morgan's enemies grew restless, their patience worn thin. Former partners accused him of treacherous betrayals. Political figures, humiliated during his 2007 trial, nursed bitter memories of his threats. Cartel leaders,
Their voices laced with menace whispered of millions inexplicably missing from their accounts. Even his ex-wife, her fury now sharpened to a knife's edge, filed a lawsuit accusing him of supplying illegal drugs. Morgan Salazar was a man encircled by a pack of hungry wolves, each patiently biding its time, waiting for the opportune moment to strike. Yet Morgan moved with an almost delusional confidence, as if truly untouchable, certain he could outwit anyone, even fate itself. It was against this volatile backdrop of power, betrayal, and hidden motives that Francis and Morgan embarked on their ill-fated journey into the Colorado mountains in June 2010. To their friends, it was merely a 5-day hiking trip, a picturesque escape. To Morgan, it was a temporary reprieve, a breath before the storm of looming lawsuits and criminal hearings. But to those who truly knew his past, those who understood the shadows he cast, it was the last place Morgan Salazar was ever seen alive.
The Descent into the Peaks. By June 2010, Morgan Salazar was once again ensnared in the legal system, juggling a dizzying array of lawsuits and criminal investigations that threatened, finally, to shatter the armor of influence he had worn for so long. His ex-wife's accusations of drug trafficking hung over him like a suffocating storm cloud, while federal investigators quietly prepared to haul him into yet another hearing scheduled for July. But, in typical defiant fashion, Morgan refused to confront his troubles head-on. Instead, he announced to Francis and a tight circle of trusted friends that they would embark on a hiking expedition deep into the Colorado peaks, a rugged, unforgiving stretch of mountains famed for its dense pine forests, treacherous sheer cliffs, and trails that could turn deadly without warning. 5 days, he declared, his voice carrying an edge. 5 days to breathe before the circus begins. His tone transformed the planned vacation into something more akin to a challenge, as if daring the world to come find him, to catch him if it could. The group consisted of 6: Morgan, Francis, and 4 longtime companions drawn from his intertwined business and social circles. They arrived laden with expensive gear, high-tech cameras, and meticulously packed rations, exuding an energy more suited to a luxurious ski lodge than a challenging trek into wild country. At first, the trip unfolded like a scene from a pristine postcard. The days stretched long and bright, the sentinel pines standing guard against the boundless blue sky, the mountains echoing with the joyful symphony of birdsong and wind. Around the crackling campfire, stories flowed freely. Laughter warmed the cool night air, and even Morgan seemed to shed his hardened shell, appearing lighter, almost human. He cracked jokes, grilled sausages over the dancing flames, and spoke of his children with a surprising, tender vulnerability. Francis, however, remained subtly reserved. She smiled dutifully for group photos, leaned into Morgan's embrace when others watched, but the moment his gaze drifted, her expression would tighten, a flicker of distant sadness clouding her eyes. Her mind, it seemed, was miles away, far beyond the serene mountain vista. One of the companions later recalled how Francis often slipped away from the group, phone pressed to her ear, her voice whisper hushed, her back turned to conceal her conversation. At the time, it seemed innocuous. Later, investigators would tirelessly question whether those whispered calls were to family or to someone meticulously building a case against her enigmatic husband. On the 3rd day, a subtle but palpable shift in mood began to settle over the group. They had hiked since morning, traversing perilous ridges and narrow paths that overlooked valleys carved deep into the ancient stone. By noon, tensions were undeniable. Morgan had grown visibly restless, striding ahead of the group, frequently turning to cast sharp, scrutinizing glances at Francis, as if sensing an unspoken truth hanging heavy between them. She, in turn, lagged behind, her gaze fixed on the mountains with a profound, weary sadness. When they paused for lunch in a sun-dappled clearing, one of their friends overheard them whispering intensely, their voices low, barely audible above the mountain breeze, but charged with a fierce energy. "You don't understand the danger you're in," Morgan muttered, his jaw clenched, his voice tight with suppressed anger. Francis responded with something softer, her words swallowed by the wind, but the set of her shoulders, the unwavering look in her eyes carried the undeniable weight of defiance. By evening, the group made camp near the whispering edge of the forest. The sun, a molten coin, slipped behind the jagged peaks, painting the vast sky in breathtaking shades of gold and bruised violet. They built a robust fire, cooked their evening meal, and passed around a flask of whiskey, each sip attempting to soothe the growing unease that now permeated the mountain air.
For a fleeting while, the echoes of laughter resumed, a fragile shield against the deepening shadows. Yet an undeniable current of unease began to ripple beneath the surface of their camaraderie. Around the stroke of midnight, as most of the group finally retreated into the quiet solace of their tents, Morgan and Francis made an unexpected announcement. "We're taking a shortcut trail back towards the lodge," Morgan stated, his voice unnervingly calm, a placid surface hiding unseen depths. "We'll meet you all tomorrow." The others, their sleep-addled minds struggling to comprehend, urged caution, warning against the perils of navigating unfamiliar paths in the inky blackness. But Morgan, with a dismissive wave, brushed aside their concerns. Francis stood silently beside him, the cold beam of her flashlight carving a restless arc through the ancient trees, her face a mask, utterly unreadable. Together, they turned and melted into the dense forest, leaving behind only the fading whisper of their footsteps, swallowed by the vast, indifferent night.
The vanishing. Initially, there was no panic. Morgan's stubborn independence was legendary, and Francis, ever loyal, often followed where he led. But as the first fragile rays of dawn painted the eastern peaks, revealing an empty campsite, unease sharpened into a cold dread. The remaining friends, their earlier jests replaced by a growing terror, retraced the trails, their desperate shouts echoing hollowly through the wilderness. By midday, their frantic calls for help shattered the mountain's peace. Search and rescue teams descended within hours, a flurry of barking dogs, roaring helicopters, and determined volunteers. They scoured every ravine, every rushing river, every jagged ridge, meticulously combing every conceivable path the couple might have taken. But the mountains gave nothing back, not a trace. The campsite where they were last seen offered no signs of struggle, no discarded belongings, no broken branches, no telltale footprints leading away. It was as if the ancient forest itself had opened its maw and swallowed them whole. The investigation swelled, growing wider, deeper. Detectives, their faces grim, interviewed the four friends relentlessly, pressing them, dissecting every word for inconsistencies. Why had Morgan insisted on leaving at midnight? Why had Francis followed so quietly, so compliantly? Was it a lover's quarrel that spiraled into savage violence? Or had some unseen hand lured them away into the darkness? Rumors like wildfire consumed the press. Some claimed Morgan had orchestrated his own disappearance, a masterful escape from the closing net of the courts. Others whispered darkly that the cartels, finally, had called in their debt, executing him in the brutal heart of the wilderness and silencing Francis as a tragic witness. A darker, more unsettling theory suggested Frances herself might have betrayed him, and that Morgan, upon discovering her secrets, had silenced her before vanishing into the shadows. None of it could be proven. Weeks bled into months. Posters of the missing couple, their smiling faces frozen in a time that no longer existed, were tacked to bulletin boards across the state, their eyes staring out at an endless procession of strangers. Yet no bodies, no discarded gear, no shred of conclusive evidence ever surfaced. The wilderness remained an impenetrable, unforgiving vault. To the public, it became a haunting riddle. The notorious property dealer who had defied justice for years, and the woman who believed she could save him, gone without a trace beneath the wide, merciless sky of the Colorado peaks.
The message from the grave. 2 years crawled by since Morgan and Frances vanished into the Colorado wilderness. The case, once a raging inferno of headlines, had begun to cool, reduced to a lingering, perplexing mystery buried beneath newer scandals and fresh tragedies. Their families, however, clung to a fragile hope, especially Frances's sister, who faithfully journeyed to the mountains each summer, leaving wilting flowers and heartfelt notes at the trailhead. Morgan's ex-wife, a portrait of bitter indignation, remained unyielding, fiercely convinced he had faked his own death to evade her relentless lawsuits. The police, despite multiple exhaustive expeditions, had uncovered nothing. Not a shred of clothing, no discarded backpacks, not even a single footprint that could be definitively tied to the missing couple. It was as though the very earth had simply absorbed them. Then, in the late autumn of 2012, 2 hikers, venturing off the beaten path, stumbled upon something profoundly unsettling. Beneath the rotting skeleton of an abandoned ski jump, half collapsed and long forgotten in a ravine not far from one of the treacherous side trails the couple had been suspected of taking, lay a strange anomaly. At first glance, it seemed like typical wilderness debris, a broken crate, scraps of plastic, branches carried by the tireless wind. But as the hikers ventured closer, a chilling detail emerged. A worn leather strap peeking out from beneath a shroud of snow-matted leaves. They cautiously brushed aside the icy foliage and uncovered a weathered rucksack. Its zippers were seized by rust, its fabric stained by years of exposure, yet unmistakably intact. When investigators arrived, their discovery expanded, not 1, but 2 bags buried beneath the skeletal remnants of wood and rusted steel. Inside lay items long assumed lost to the elements: Frances's waterlogged journal, Morgan's wallet, a set of keys, a cracked wristwatch, and a faded map of the hiking trails, meticulously marked in red ink. There were also deeply personal belongings: a tube of lipstick, a pair of sunglasses, a child's drawing folded and tucked into Morgan's notebook, a poignant echo of a life abruptly severed. Each item felt like a ghost, a tangible fragment of 2 lives cut short. But the most haunting revelation lay within Frances's journal. Waterlogged and torn, most of its pages had dissolved into illegibility, the ink bleeding into indistinct black clouds. Yet on one surviving, defiant page, scrawled in hurried, uneven letters, were two words that instantly froze the blood of the investigators: revenge taken.
The phrase sent shockwaves through the stagnant case, reigniting the public's morbid fascination and deepening their suspicions. What did it truly mean? Some posited Frances had penned it in her final, desperate moments, a cryptic clue pointing to Morgan's myriad enemies. Others argued Morgan himself might have scrawled the words, a cunning ruse to mislead investigators and stage his own disappearance. There was even chilling speculation that a third party had planted the bags beneath the ski jump years later, leaving the cryptic note as a deliberate, mocking taunt. The fact that the ski jump was located not far from the original exhaustive search zone raised further disquieting questions. How had dozens of trained teams missed it before? Was it simply an oversight, a tragic lapse, or had it been deliberately hidden, awaiting the opportune moment for its macabre unveiling? The discovery yanked Morgan's shadowed past roaring back into the unforgiving glare of the spotlight. Prosecutors, vengeful rivals, and former associates, each one harbored a potent reason to wish him dead. Old cases, dormant for years, resurfaced in the hungry press. The 2005 conviction, the chilling 2007 murder trial, his pervasive cartel ties, the endless lawsuits. Every tangled thread of his history seemed to connect to someone who might have uttered, with chilling satisfaction, "Revenge taken." Even his children, now teenagers, were dragged unwillingly into the ensuing storm, forced to face relentless reporters who demanded to know if they believed their father was dead or merely hiding.
Frances's family, meanwhile, desperately clung to the belief that the journal entry was her final act of defiance, her last testament. But others began to cast a critical eye on her role as well. If Frances had indeed been secretly gathering evidence against Morgan, as the persistent rumors suggested, had she been silenced for her betrayal, or had she, in a shocking twist, turned on him herself? The police meticulously investigated every conceivable angle, but the fresh evidence only plunged the mystery into a deeper, more impenetrable fog. Forensic tests yielded nothing conclusive. The bags bore the unmistakable signs of years of weathering, consistent with prolonged exposure to the elements. Yet there were no incriminating bloodstains, no traces of DNA from outside parties, nothing to definitively prove foul play. The enigmatic note in the journal could not be precisely dated. It might have been written during the ill-fated trip or cruelly planted years later. Witnesses, a procession of opportunists and fantasists, came forward with increasingly wild claims. Some swore they had seen Morgan alive in Mexico. Others insisted Frances had been spotted boarding a flight to South America. None of these tantalizing leads ever held firm. The only unwavering truth investigators could cling to was this: Morgan and Frances had walked into those unforgiving mountains, and they had never walked out. The abandoned ski jump, now a macabre shrine, became a vortex of speculation. Tourists hiked to its desolate location, leaving flickering candles and poignant photographs. True crime enthusiasts dissected every minute detail online, arguing endlessly over whether Morgan was brutally murdered, cleverly hiding, or living somewhere under a new, carefully constructed identity. Conspiracy theorists feverishly tied the phrase "revenge taken" to ruthless cartels, cutthroat rival developers, and even shadowy political groups. For the detectives who had toiled on the case from its very inception, the discovery was both a breakthrough and a curse. It reopened every raw wound, every unanswered question, yet offered no semblance of closure. If anything, it rendered the mystery darker, more infuriatingly unsolvable. The wilderness had reluctantly given back a handful of belongings, but it steadfastly refused to relinquish the truth.
The suspects emerge.
The discovery of the luggage beneath the abandoned ski jump did far more than simply revive a cold case. It ignited a firestorm of speculation that devoured the press, gripped the courts, and consumed every corner of the public imagination. Morgan Salazar had never been an ordinary missing person. He was a man whose very name carried the stench of scandal, the chill of violence, and the intoxicating allure of raw power. Investigators, their resolve hardened, quickly compiled a list of probable suspects, each one inexorably tied to his labyrinthine past. First, and perhaps most obvious, were the cartels. For years, whispers had circulated about Morgan's intricate dealings with vast narcotics routes, cleverly disguised as legitimate property developments. Millions, it was rumored, were funneled through his construction firms and land exchanges, all serving as elaborate fronts for trafficking. The chilling phrase, "revenge taken," fit neatly, almost perfectly, into that brutal narrative. Perhaps an old debt, long overdue, had finally been collected, brutally and without mercy. Then came his political enemies. Morgan's audacious habit of strong-arming judges, bribing influential officials, and ruthlessly exploiting connections within both the ruling party and the opposition had left a trail of bitter resentment and loathing across multiple camps. To some, the discovery of the bags beneath the ski jump seemed less like a cartel execution and more like a meticulously staged political hit, a chilling message delivered with a specific, calculated intent. Beyond these powerful entities, there were more personal suspects. His ex-wife stood chief among them. She had fought him fiercely in court for custody of their children and for his vast assets, filing accusations of drug trafficking just weeks before the fateful hiking trip. To the ravenous tabloids, the idea of a vengeful ex-wife orchestrating his elaborate downfall was an irresistible, tantalizing narrative. Yet there was one final, deeply unsettling possibility, a theory that sent a shiver down the spine of everyone involved: Frances herself. Some whispered that Frances, exhausted by a life lived in the ever-darkening shadow of a man hunted by unseen enemies, had perhaps planned to escape him. Caught in the unforgiving web of his past, she might have found herself either a silent accomplice in his ultimate demise or, more tragically, the final victim of his spiraling paranoia. The police, grasping at straws, made several arrests over the following year, yet each one crumbled. A former business partner of Morgan's, a man rumored to be linked to a cartel front in New Mexico, was taken into custody after a chilling rumor surfaced. He had allegedly confessed in a drunken stupor at a bar, boasting of finally shutting Salazar up. Under intense questioning, he vehemently denied everything, and with no tangible physical evidence connecting him to the ski jump discovery, he was reluctantly released. Months later, 2 men with minor cartel ties in Denver were swept up, accused of transporting evidence away from the crime scene. Their arrests ignited a brief media frenzy, but the cases ultimately collapsed in court. In one particularly dramatic twist, Frances's own brother was subjected to intense scrutiny after investigators unearthed a significant loan he had received from Morgan just before the marriage, a debt that remained unpaid. The theory, unsettling and divisive, suggested that simmering resentment, coupled with a deep-seated fear of Morgan's volatile nature, might have driven him to an act of desperate violence. The family, a fractured chorus of indignation, protested furiously, and no charges were ever filed. Each arrest, each fleeting hope, was followed by a torrent of press conferences, a frenzy of speculation, and eventually the bitter taste of disappointment as the flimsy evidence unraveled under merciless scrutiny.
The enduring echoes of doubt. Meanwhile, the theories multiplied, spiraling into a maelstrom of conjecture. Some journalists, with sensational flair, published exposés suggesting Morgan had meticulously staged his own disappearance, planting the luggage years later with the cryptic "Revenge Taken" as an elaborate decoy, granting him precious time to vanish beyond reach. His Peruvian heritage, a convenient narrative hook, fueled these claims. Sightings of a man eerily resembling him in the ancient streets of Cusco, the bustling markets of Lima, and remote border towns circulated widely, yet none could ever be definitively verified. Others insisted Frances was the true tragic victim, an innocent woman caught in the brutal crossfire of a vendetta against her husband, her voice forever lost beneath the oppressive shadow of his infamy. The gnawing ambiguity gnawed at the public conscience. Was she a bewildered bystander, a willing partner, or something far more dangerous? Theories painted her alternately as a secret informant, courageously gathering evidence against her husband, or as a woman finally pushed beyond her breaking point, snapping under the crushing weight of Morgan's lies and orchestrating a final, devastating betrayal. As the years inexorably dragged on, the case gradually transformed, shedding its identity as a mere search for justice and evolving into something akin to a modern myth. The abandoned ski jump, a decaying monument to unanswered questions, turned into a morbid landmark where amateur sleuths gathered like restless spirits, trading theories and meticulously combing the scarred earth for overlooked clues. Documentaries, slick and tantalizing, aired on late-night television, each one grandly claiming to unravel the ultimate truth, yet none offering anything resembling genuine closure.
The suspects, who had been dragged unwillingly into the harsh glare of the spotlight, business partners, shadowy cartel contacts, even Frances's own bewildered relatives, emerged irrevocably scarred by suspicion, their lives permanently warped by their association with Morgan Salazar's haunting disappearance. The authorities, constantly pressured to deliver results, found themselves perpetually chasing shadows. Every promising lead dissolved into a dead end. Every suspect possessed enough motive to justify their inclusion, yet lacked the irrefutable proof required for conviction. Through it all, the chilling phrase, scrawled in Frances's waterlogged journal, continued to haunt investigators like a malevolent specter. Revenge Taken. Who had written it, and when, precisely? Was it Frances's dying message, a desperate cry from the abyss? Was it Morgan's twisted final performance, a masterpiece of deception? Or was it the hand of some unknown entity, an architect of chaos who desired the mystery to endure forever, a tantalizing, unsolvable puzzle? Each terrifying possibility carried its own sinister weight, and none could ever be definitively confirmed. The case devolved into a dizzying hall of mirrors, where every suspect could be guilty, every theory could hold a kernel of truth, yet nothing could ever be truly proven. What began as a man and his young wife vanishing into the vast, indifferent Colorado peaks had transformed into one of the most perplexing crime sagas in modern memory, a relentless riddle that seemed to devour everyone who dared to even attempt to solve it. The legend endures. More than a decade after their disappearance, the story of Morgan and Frances had transcended the conventional boundaries of a mere missing persons case. It had transformed into a cultural legend, a chilling parable of corruption, profound love, and brutal retribution, woven indelibly into the rugged, untamed backdrop of the Colorado Rockies. The case lived on, an undying presence in countless retellings. True crime documentaries dissected every scrap of evidence. Podcasts tirelessly theorized. Books written by seasoned journalists who had followed the investigation from its genesis, and even fictionalized thrillers loosely inspired by the couple's tragic fate. For Morgan's legion of enemies, the disappearance was final.
irrefutable proof that power and influence, no matter how absolute, would eventually crumble under the inexorable weight of justice or vengeance. For his few remaining defenders, it served as a stark cautionary reminder of how corrosive rumors and cutthroat politics could destroy a man, painting him as a villain until his enemies finally made him vanish. But what truly gave the story its lasting, hypnotic grip on the public imagination was not Morgan alone. It was Frances, the luminous woman tragically caught in the storm. To many, she became the tragic heart of the mystery, a woman hopelessly in love with a man dangerous enough to doom them both. Her voice silenced, but faintly preserved in the torn, waterlogged pages of her journal. That phrase, "revenge taken," echoed like a curse, debated endlessly on online forums, dissected on podcasts, and whispered by candlelight among amateur sleuths hiking up to the desolate, abandoned ski jump. Each new generation of investigators revisited it, each coming away with a different, often conflicting interpretation. Was it a confession, a desperate warning, or a cruel, masterful trick? The ambiguity was both maddening and magnetically compelling.
The pervasive legacy of the case was not confined to abstract speculation alone. It left indelible scars on real lives. Morgan's children grew up under the crushing shadow of his infamy, forever haunted by the agonizing question of whether his father had been murdered, was cunningly hiding, or was perhaps even complicit in his own dramatic disappearance. Frances's family remained profoundly split, some steadfastly insisting on her innocence, others whispering that she knew far more than she ever admitted, perhaps even playing an integral part in the unfolding tragedy. Detectives who had dedicated years to the case carried it with them long after retirement, unable to accept the gaping, unsettling void at its center. Some confessed that in their quiet, reflective moments, they dreamed of the mountains swallowing them too, drawing them into the same impenetrable darkness that had claimed Morgan and Frances. The ski jump site, now both shrine and macabre spectacle, continued to draw pilgrims. They came to light candles, leave fresh flowers, and read aloud passages from Frances's journal, as if invoking her restless ghost. Simultaneously, thrill-seekers and conspiracy theorists trampled the ground, relentlessly searching for elusive clues that might connect the case to larger, more sinister webs of corruption. Powerful politicians, ruthless cartel overlords, or secret, unspeakable deals between governments. The physical place itself had become a stage for enduring myths, the decaying skeleton of the ski jump looming like a monument to humanity's unanswered questions. Even seasoned law enforcement agencies, usually cautious about the enduring allure of unsolved mysteries, eventually acknowledged that the case had become something far more profound than a mere file in their archives. Every few years, they would briefly reopen it, often triggered by a new supposed sighting of Morgan abroad, or the tantalizing promise of a new forensic method that might finally wring secrets from the weathered, silent bags. But each time, the exhaustive search yielded nothing. No bones, no weapons, no definitive evidence. It was as though the mountains themselves had forged a pact of unbreakable silence, keeping their profound secrets hidden beneath an eternal blanket of snow and pine. That very silence gave birth to even darker theories, that Morgan, with his unparalleled influence and intricate connections, had orchestrated a disappearance so perfect, so masterful, it left behind only tantalizing, unprovable fragments. Some claimed he lived under a new, carefully constructed identity in Peru, a puppet master pulling strings from the shadows. Others swore Frances had been the true, ultimate target, punished for some secret Morgan had ruthlessly kept.
with the revenge directed not at him, but savagely, devastatingly at her. Each possibility was more unsettling than the last, but none could ever be conclusively disproven. By the time the 13th anniversary of their disappearance arrived, the case had blossomed into a full-blown legend, part chilling ghost story, part morality tale, and part utterly unsolvable riddle. Campfire storytellers in Colorado wove it into their haunting narratives. Hikers, brave or foolish enough to venture near the ski jump at night, spoke of hearing phantom whispers, and some even swore they saw fleeting figures in the trees, a man and a woman walking together, forever just out of reach, their faces perpetually turned away. In the end, the true legacy of Morgan and Francis was not simply their vanishing, it was the crushing weight of questions left behind, the ripple effects that stubbornly refused to fade. They had become powerful symbols of how secrets can utterly devour lives, how revenge can echo across the unyielding expanse of years, and how some mysteries, by their very nature, resist every desperate attempt to be solved. For those who had loved them, closure never came. For those who hated Morgan, justice never felt complete. And for everyone else, the story endured, precisely because it was unsatisfying, because it defiantly resisted neat, comforting endings. The case of Morgan and Francis was not just an unsolved mystery. It was a mirror, reflecting back the deepest fears, the darkest suspicions, and the most morbid fascinations of everyone who dared to gaze into its profound, unsettling depths.